Okay, so this last part of the chapter is covering the learning theories. There's a very different school of thought about how children would develop, and it's offered through learning theories. Whereas psychoanalytic theories, remember, it focuses on the internal processes of the mind. The learning theories, though, is going to really focus on observable behavior. These theories, they're kind of based on the link between the stimulus, which is an event that's happening within an external environment, and that response of the child. In the next few slides, we're going to talk about how the theories known as behavioralism, uh, and these, of course, are based off the principles of classical conditioning and operant conditioning for those who have already taken courses. But pretty much it's going based off of classical conditioning and operant conditioning, along with social cognitive theory. And now social cognitive theory is really going to be based off the principles of modeling and imitation. So let's talk about some of the pioneers. John B. Watson in classical conditioning pretty much is considered the father of the theory known as behaviorism. Unlike other psychologists within the 1900s, he really wasn't interested in studying the impact of genetic influences or the workings of the mind in terms of human development. Rather than that, he kind of concentrated more on what he can actually see, behavior, and what people actually do. So in the modern day of psychology, at that point was really just emerging, and psychologists here in the U.S., they really were trying extremely hard to be able to establish this field as scientific, that it's with testable predictions based off of observable phenomenon, rather than what Freud suggests in those unseen concepts of the unconscious mind. So getting back to Watson, pretty much what he did was he studied ways in which the environment would influence human behavior. He's he kind of subscribed to the notion that the great philosophers like Aristotle and John Locke had attained, in which they felt you were born with this blank slate. Now, tabula rasa is what they're talking about, blank slate. Pretty much in this concept, it's ready to be drawn on by environmental experiences. We're like a sponge. What we're going to do is we're going to take everything in as a child, is what he felt. And he felt so strongly about this is that he kind of made the statement of being, give me a dozen healthy infants, well informed, in my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and be able to train them to become any type of specialist I think they should be, that being a doctor or a lawyer. He talked about artists and so forth. And regardless of their talents, the penchants or their tendencies and abilities and vocations, or that of what he gathered from his ancestors, he felt that is going beyond the facts, and he realized that there's advocates to the contrary, but that they've been doing this for so many thousands of years that it can be replicated. Now, let's look at the breakdown of what these learning theories would be. Like I mentioned, classical conditioning would be one. And so now what you see here is what Ivan Pavlov contributed in terms of classical conditioning. Here it was the pairing of stimuli with another in order to produce a response. So with classical conditioning, know that this is a process, again, that is where they're taking a stimulus or even an event that's within the environment, and what they're doing is pairing it with another stimulus repeatedly, over and over and over again. And that first stimulus is known as the unconditioned stimulus. Unconditioned because that stimulus pretty much, doesn't really provoke anything per se, but a natural response. Uh, and so that's why it's an unconditioned response. So Pavlov, who was a physiologist actually from Russia, he kind of was looking more into the biological and what the body does in terms of studying reflexes as well as digestion. And what happened was he presented food to hungry dogs in his lab. Anyway, the dogs would salivate. And it's just like if we were hungry, we walk by a bakery, get the smell of that fresh bread inside us, and oh, we say, yes, I would love a piece of that pumpernickel bread. That's my favorite bread, by the way. But anyway, in this case, the food would be an unconditioned stimulus because pretty much that natural response was just that. It was unconditional. It made us hungry. It made the dog salivate. So Pavlov, he kind of decided, well, what would happen if I used some kind of noise like a ringing of a bell, and I presented this right before I present the food? Well, initially the bell didn't do anything in terms of making the dog salivate. So it's considered a neutral stimulus. Why? Because the bell rang, the dog did nothing. But over time, Pavlov continued to ring that bell right before presenting the food. So now the dogs, they started to associate the sound of that bell with the food. So the animals, pretty much what they did was they learned something that that bell would do. They're like, wait a minute, every time I hear the bell, there's the food. And now, so with that, that bell became a conditioned stimulus. So finally, Pavlov, he said, well, I'm going to just present only the bell and see what happens. Um, and see if the dogs would respond to just the bell and no food. Well, when he did that, salivation did occur. So what was the bell being initially a neutral stimulus, because the neutral stimulus again really didn't do anything, but because it was paired with the food over time repeatedly, it's what we now called a conditioned stimulus. Okay, and when the dog salivated from hearing the bell, it's what we would now call a conditioned response. Yes, they were salivating when they saw the food before, so that was an unconditioned response because the food was the unconditioned stimulus, and it was presented with a neutral stimulus. And remember, that neutral stimulus was the bell, because when the bell was by itself before pairing it with the food, it really didn't do anything for the dogs. Probably annoyed them. But as time went on, again, presenting the bell immediately after the food, dogs began to salivate. So that unconditioned response for the food turned into a conditioned response because of the bell, which is now a conditioned stimulus. And yeah, it can get really confusing at times, but if you think about it and apply this to everyday situations, you'll find actually that we go through this all the time. Now, in Canvas, you will find that I put a series of videos online that will help assist you in understanding what Watson was doing, particularly with little Albert. I won't go into details with little Albert because I do have a video on Canvas for you to watch, but it does give you examples about classical conditioning and how the whole process works. Okay, so let's talk about B.F. Skinner. Now, he was a behavioralist as well, but he took a different take, okay? What he did was he developed a theory of behaviorism by introducing the idea about operant conditioning. So while he was studying rats while at Harvard, he saw that the rats were affected not only by what came before the behavior, as was in classical conditioning, but instead he saw that by what came after. And through his experiments, he was able to conclude that spontaneous behaviors, they're really controlled by the environment's response to them. So defining operant conditioning, know that it's a reinforcement is anything that will follow a behavior and increases the likelihood that that behavior is going to continue to happen again, okay, or happen again. So reinforcement can be a situation that can be planned out, like if the textbook might talk about candies parents give to their toddlers when they want them to potty. I didn't do that, but that's one technique that might be used. But understand reinforcements can be unplanned as well. Just like when we nod and smile when someone is talking to us. As long as you smile and nod, guess what? The person is probably going to keep speaking to you because they find that you're responding to them pleasant and rewarding. So that would be positive type of reinforcement, and that occurs when you get something you like and you want. So it's kind of easy to think about different forms of positive reinforcement. In elementary school, children that receive stars or point system for doing well in the class, being able to get an allowance for doing your chores, or children being allowed to watch their favorite TV shows because they did their studying. These are all forms of positive reinforcement. Now, we talked about the positive. Negative reinforcement is going to occur when something that we don't like is removed. Think of it as a word negative, like the minus sign, taking something away. So I don't want you to automatically assume it's a bad thing, because that's what we usually feel when we hear the terms positive or negative. Instead, think of that minus sign that we're trying to take away or decrease, reduce or eliminate a particular behavior. Okay? Like, here's one. Wearing seat belts. Do you wear your seatbelt when you drive? You should simply do it because it's going to help keep you alive. But car manufacturers, they weren't too sure if there was enough incentive. So guess what? In psychology, we work wonders. So pretty much they probably got the idea from a psychologist that's in the industrial organization psychology. But they were able to learn how to put in these loud, annoying dings or buzzers inside the car when you don't buckle up, okay? And that noise will continue until you do buckle your seatbelt. That is a form of negative reinforcement, okay? The buzzing of the buzzing sound was going to initiate you clicking it and buckling up. It removed the behavior of not using your seat belts. So you now started to use your seat belts. That negative reinforcement allowed you to reduce or eliminate a behavior, that being not being safe. You buckle up now. So in that analogy, it's pretty much we're kind of getting away from the annoying sounds, and that reinforcement helps you to keep going and hopefully be safe on the road. I want you to know, though, with both positive and negative reinforcement, it causes a behavior to happen more. Okay, that's the in terms of reinforcement, is to increase a particular behavior. All right. With positive reinforcement, getting the good stuff, the things that we like, is going to give us incentive to keep doing a particular behavior. Whereas negative reinforcement is going to help us change the behavior by providing a stimulus that would help reduce the behavior we shouldn't have, that we don't, that's not really acceptable or liked. Okay. Now, let's see. Of course, we still are talking about learning theories. So, punishment can be a similar experience in that there's positive punishment and negative punishment. Now, remember, with reinforcement, we're actually trying to increase a particular behavior. Okay, that's both positive and negative. Whereas with punishment, providing a consequence, it will actually take away the likelihood of undesirable behaviors. Okay, so let's think of an example. Um, Child didn't do well, didn't clean their room. So just like we allowed them to watch TV and reinforce the good behavior because they would clean their room and do their chores, well, because they didn't do their chores, instead, we're going to now take away the TV time. By taking away the TV time, that was what we called what? Is it a positive or a negative punishment? Think about it. All right. Right now, what I would like for you to do is go ahead and watch the different videos, as including Skinner's Pigeons. Then it's going to talk about the operant conditioning some more. Then there's also just the key word I forgot to talk about: extinction. You know how we talked about reinforcing behaviors? Well, sometimes things will stop when a stimulus is no longer being utilized, or reinforcement or punishment is no longer being provided. So, and it actually, that process occurs not only in operant conditioning, I didn't mention it, but it's also in terms of classical conditioning. We do have the same terms of extinction, just with slight differences. So the process by which a behavior stops when it receives no responses from the environment is pretty much extinction. In terms of classical conditioning, extinction occurs usually when, you know how we just do the bell and we no longer present the food? Well, over time, when you keep doing that, eventually the bell becomes that neutral stimulus again, because the incentive of the food really hasn't been presented in a long time. And that's extinction. Now, just quick notes. Not going to say too much on these areas, but Bandura, he believed in social cognitive theory, and more or less the main goal was that he felt children will learn through modeling. So, prime example, potty training. A lot of times parents would actually take their child to the bathroom and have them watch them use the bathroom so that they can kind of get an idea of what they do. Can you think of other ways that we learn through imitating? Think of dancing. That's an example I'll give you. New dance comes out. Someone generally shows us what the dance moves are in order for us to learn a dance move. Okay? Now, with social cognitive theory, here it's more about how the environment impacts us internally. Okay? that there's more inner processes. How we think and feel goes along with how we behave. You will see, hopefully on Canvas, there should be also a video in talking about the Bobo doll experiment. And I will leave it at that. Okay, so I'm actually going to stop here. There may be questions on the exam about Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Just know that these different definitions to assist you, and be sure to go through the stages. They're all found in the textbook, but know that schemes is how we would take time to organize the world for ourselves. Assimilation is how we'll fit the world in, what we already know. And then accommodation is taking our schemas and changing it to fit the world. Okay? All right. Know Vygotsky's social cultural theory. Now, Vygotsky's belief is everything is all social. Okay? We learn through the environment and through others. Zone of proximal development is talking about how a child's ability is going to be enhanced because someone older, more experienced, has taught them that. Without that connection with others, Vygotsky really felt that you're not going to learn anything. So that's the social culture theory. Scaffolding is basically helping put those building blocks together for a child by guiding them through particular tasks as they're learning. Hence, let's go back to the potty training. With potty training, it's a process. Having them understand what the toilet is, having them understand what happens when they go to the bathroom, having them understand, how they get older and more independent by no longer needing diapers. And the list goes on. So that's scaffolding. All right. Information processing. This is based off of cognitive theory, again, with the thought process. And we have brains that work similar to that of a computer system. Okay. We have what we call working memory, short-term memory, long-term memory. And you could think of our brain as having that, our memory can be thought of as RAM, okay? And how we store our information. The connectedness is pretty much that network model of being able to connect through associations of our experiences, because sometimes we might not have actually experienced one thing, but it doesn't mean we don't know what it is, because we're able to associate previous experiences. That's those connections that's made, and it's developed through childhood. So I'm going to stop there. Complete the text, please. Read the chapter. Do the practice exam. It'll help you. Guarantee it'll help you if you do the reading. But if you do have any questions, feel free to shoot me a note in the inbox, and I will try my best to answer them as soon as I possibly can. On that note, everyone have a great weekend, and I will see you next Thursday. Remember, Tuesday is the exam. Therefore, there is no face-to-face class, and the practice test opened up. It's open, and it's going to be open until Monday, 11:59 p.m. You only get one attempt, so do the reading and then do the test, do the quiz, practice quiz, and hopefully it'll give you a taste of what the exam is going to be like, and it'll also allow you to know what type of areas you might be weak in. All right, so that's it. Have a great one.